A reading from Matthew. Jesus said, "It is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them, and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours.' But his master replied, 'You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" I think that if I were an investment counselor who was inclined toward high-risk investments, if I were selling cryptocurrency, treasury bills printed in Uzbekistan, initial public offerings, or non-fungible tokens, NFTs, then I think would have this parable from Matthew cross-stitched on canvas and hung on my wall. At first glance, the story seems to offer a straightforward defense of venture capitalism, urging one not to shy away from high-risk, high-gain investments. It is true that one of the questions that potential investors must ask themselves is whether or not they are willing to only risk the interest they might earn on an investment, or whether they're willing to gamble with the principal investment itself. Regarding the question of preservation of principal, Matthew seems to fall squarely on the side of taking a chance on losing the initial investment itself. Or as we might say in Texas, he's willing to bet the ranch. It would also be pretty easy for me, like countless preachers before me, to use this story of the talents to make a case for stewardship, especially now that most of you will receive a letter from me this coming week urging you to take a chance on making an investment in the future of this church with your time and talents and your treasure as well. But really, I think the more salient point that Matthew is making is actually about fear. If you know me at all, you know that I tend to be rather fearless. At this stage of my life, I usually approach life with some boldness, with confidence, with trust, really, that in God's time, all will be well. However, that hasn't always been the case. As a young man, I possessed all the self-consciousness, insecurity, and uncertainty that is common among young people. Those who haven't yet experienced the hard knocks that can either leave one cynical or with the capacity to roll with the punches. I'm not a spelunker, although a childhood vacation trip through Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico had left me enamored with the idea of someday exploring dark caverns hidden deep below the Earth's surface. The opportunity appeared when a slightly older and considerably braver older friend, Jack, suggested that we explore a cave he had heard about on the shores of the San Saba River, not far from my home. We arrived at the mouth of the cave at sundown. The narrow slit of an opening and the roots dangling from the toppling trees growing above the cave did not extend to us a particularly welcoming invitation to pass through the cave's portal. But it was the thousands of bats that had decided to vacate the cave at that moment, to seek their insect supper amid the twilight, that caused me to tremble at the prospect of what awaited us in the darkness that lay ahead. At first, I swerved to avoid each bat that appeared to be heading directly at me, but eventually I realized that the bats were far too numerous to dodge, and that their sonar-aided reflexes enabled them to dart and duck with such skill that the prospect of a head-on collision was nil. And so, aided only by a pair of waterproof flashlights, we inched forward into the darkness. Any pretense of bravery on my part, or Jack's, quickly fell away. Neither of us felt compelled to exhibit leadership skills, so walking side by side, hunching forward to avoid bumping our heads on the cave's roof, we slowly pressed on. As the glimmer of light at the cave's entrance quickly receded, in both sight and memory, we noticed evidence along the cave's walls that we weren't the first visitors. The scratched inscriptions of names and dates from decades earlier marred the cave's glistening walls. The remains of stalactites, broken long ago by thoughtless souvenir seekers, still clung gamely to the cave's roof. The sulfuric smell of bat guano rushed to fill our nostrils. Still, we pressed on. Making a slight curve, the faint and rapidly receding spot of light that marked our entrance and our only exit was extinguished. Jack said, "Turn off your flashlight for a second." As I did, we experienced darkness more profound and more complete than any darkness I've known before or since. Eventually, the cave narrowed, and Jack and I were forced to crawl on our bellies through a labyrinthine network of increasingly tight passageways that led where I wasn't quite sure. After a time, to my relief, I could see that the narrow passage was opening up into a larger passage. Dropping down into the space, it felt like a largish living room with rather high ceilings, and I could take a breath again. At the far edge of the room was a sandy shore, adjacent to a small pond, and what appeared to my relief to be a rock wall marking the end of the cave. "Whew," I said, "we made it." Jack smiled in reply. "Well, not exactly," he said. "I'm told that if we drop below the surface of the pool, we'll find that the wall is really just a ledge, and that if we can hold our breath long enough and follow the ledge underwater, it will finally open up into a larger cavern." As you can imagine, I hesitated. But my friend Jack didn't, and when he plunged into the water and disappeared from sight, I followed him into the abyss. I don't really recall how long we were underwater, or for what distance I felt my way along the underside of the ledge before I emerged to the surface on the other side. But emerge I did, not just to another room, but to a cathedral of such height that the beam of my flashlight could not reach the ceiling. Stalactites and stalagmites and all manner of stunning geological formations surrounded us, each reflective of God's hidden glory, accessible only by letting go of fear and taking that internal passageway into the heart of the divine. When I first arrived here on the North Fork, I remember someone telling me that we're such a small church that we couldn't risk losing what we have. We can't risk losing any members because we have so few. We can't risk spending money because we have so little. The greater risk, I think Matthew is telling us, comes from not being bold. If we are not courageous, if we refuse to daringly use the talents and treasure we have to share the good news with others beyond these four walls, if we decide to take what we've been given by the Master and bury it in the ground, then we too could be called a lazy and wicked servant. Instead, we are called to enter into the joy of our Master. We are offered a pathway to that joy through fearlessness. We can cower in the darkness, or we can allow the light of Christ to guide us through the darkest night. Amen.